crowd.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
great. It's great. We've got to be on good behavior.
There's an overflow room somewhere too that I got to go see.
Oh, is that right? Okay, excellent. Well, how are you doing?
Doing well and excited to be here. This is our 15th year. When we started, we had our first event in Orlando 15 years ago. And we have incredible speakers. Ian, thank you for participating because of your leadership for the next 2 days. Back in Orlando, we had one big speaker. That was my mother. I don't remember exactly what she said, but I'm positive that she was critical of something I did. So,
All right. All right.
So we've come a long way.
Yes. We'll find something to be critical of.
Don't worry. I'm pretty confident
But
that'll
it is
happen.
interesting. So you founded ExcelinEd in 2007, and you were championing ideas at the time were radical, parental choice, school accountability, high expectations, and this idea of measuring what matters. And the context back then was that you could actually have bipartisan support, that even if we had warring factions, we didn't agree on how to address poverty, we didn't agree on climate change, we didn't agree on a whole bunch of things, but to the degree that we could agree on this one thing, which is that every kid, especially most vulnerable kids, should have the opportunity to go to a great school. But it seems like even that is now fractured. So what's changed? Is bipartisanship even still feasible? And where do you see it working?
Yeah, so I would say we had a bipartisan environment in the early 2000s for sure. And people did stop when they agreed on things to find consensus and work on that, even if they didn't agree on a bunch of other stuff. But we also had fights, like the A-plus plan in 1999, there was a big fight. And we had a few Democrats support it. Many didn't. We had a few Republicans that didn't support it. But we won the day because we stuck with our principles. But we always tried to find the common ground. We always tried to find, a group of people that didn't look like me or think like me or had views different in terms of ideology to find common ground. And we were, politicians back then were rewarded for that. Now,
and fights are okay. I mean, it's not that we agree on everything, but there's a process of democratic discourse and coming to resolution.
Now, politicians, it seems, and we have some incredible leaders here, at the state level, this is less of a problem than it is in DC. People now are rewarded for being the loudest voice, for going on social media and ripping to shreds the other side. They garner this group of people that validates what they think, but it makes it harder to find common ground. And I think there's also a change, which is this so-called social justice movement has supplanted on the left increasingly because their voices are really loud and people are scared to go against this.
What's the difference between justice and social justice?
Well, justice would be that every child should have the right to gain a year's worth of knowledge in a year's time. Social justice, the way I see it, is to say life's unfair and there's no way that a child can gain a year's worth of knowledge, so we're going to lower expectations, lower standards for everybody so that we create equality based on mediocrity rather than equality where people are lifted up. And that's a current disease on the left, with all due respect, that needs to be purged from their lexicon. But we can see it play out not just in education, but across the board. So the left-right coalitions that existed, even in the Obama years, for sure, has gone away completely. And that means that I think what we need now to do in states where there is an interest in reforming, where you do believe that children can learn, to create the policies to be a showcase for the rest of the country that has lagged behind because of this culture that says life's not fair. I mean, we have examples of it, Ian. Like the one that really got me riled up, I got a list of them, but the one that most recently got me riled up is Oregon, where they decided that they would not have an exit exam for high school because of social justice issues. So what they're saying is, kids of color, kids of low income, they're victims. They can't learn, and so we're not going to require them to, we're not going to say that they can learn, and we're going to organize ourselves around them so that they do. We're saying that life's not fair, and therefore it's okay to just be passed along. And we know what the social impacts of those are over the long haul. It's devastating for those kids and their families.
I was going to ask you about this because it's not just happening in Oregon, right? If we look at the most recent NAEP data, math and reading scores for 13-year-olds, lowest levels in decades, right? And yet the ways in which states are dealing with these issues in Oregon, hopefully we're not embarrassing the
I hope someone from Oregon's here because you're the freedom fighter.
But it's not just Oregon. I think Chris Cerf, there he is. Chris Cerf is in the audience, from former superintendent in New Jersey. The New Jersey State Board of Education just made a decision to lower the cut score on what it means to be proficient in order to graduate from high school.
In your state.
Well, I'm coming to New York State, but so New Yorkers get ready too. But in New Jersey, under the old cut score, only 36% of students would be able to demonstrate proficiency. So the brilliant idea that the New Jersey department said was, let's lower the cut score. So now 80% of students are proficient. Like, voila, student achievement mastered. So, and then of course, New York, just 2 days ago, my home state has announced that what has been the gold standard for almost a century to demonstrate proficiency, what we call our Regents exams, is now going to become optional. And it's not, and it's not to say that there might be other kinds of rigorous alternative assessments. It's just that prove to us that you're going to have the mechanism to do performance-based assessments in such a way that you'll have consistency on how those are evaluated. Because the whole idea of objectivity is to avoid the very discrimination that you're saying is so prevalent.
Exactly. And look, one way to measure this is to take the proficiency for NAEP.
Yep.
And measure how states do on their own, accountability standards and see what the gap is. And there, it's a bipartisan problem. The fact is that most states have a huge gap, and most states could do a lot better. All states. I mean, we brag a lot about Florida, and I'm very proud of the work that's been done post my time as governor. There's been all sorts of really great legislation passed, but too many kids in Florida, just as it is in every state, are not proficient in reading and math and science. They're not really college ready, and they're certainly not career ready, even though they get a diploma these days. Yeah. So there's a lot of work that has to be done. Yeah. And I'd say the two things that really matter going forward, and this is where a tremendous amount of work's being done in states, and I'm so excited about the renaissance and reform that's taking place now, is robust accountability, where you say every child can learn, and it's up to us to organize ourselves to assure that they do, which means a high bar and consequences between failure, mediocrity, and success. There should be huge rewards for success. That's one pillar. And the second pillar is empowering parents to make choices and make them informed consumers and give them an array of choices that when I was governor couldn't have existed. But now with technology, we have we have hybrid forms of learning. We have all sorts of exciting forms of learning, and parents need to be the lead on this. Yep. And your experience in New York, running successful, highly successful charter schools, and now with Vertex, yep. You're living proof of how parents need to be not pushed away, but they need to be brought in.
No, and parents vote with their feet. I mean, when you say one of the pillars is accountability, and I agree, like you're speaking to the people in the room that are setting the policies that ultimately result in things like what's going on in Oregon, New Jersey, New York. Help this group. How do you fight against that? Because while we say accountability is important, and it has been important from the very beginning, it seems to be eroding.
Well, I'll give you an example of where it's not. Mississippi. In the old days, people would, every state, including Florida, yay, Mississippi. In the old days, everybody would whisper under their breath, thank God for Mississippi, because we're a competitive system and every state's ranked. And,
wow.
Florida was 50th in graduation rates in high school in the 1990s, and everybody was saying, thank God for Florida. Well, Mississippi, which is 70% free and reduced lunch students, minority by a large margin, developed a pre-K to 3 strategy as it relates to early literacy. Part of it was based on the success in Florida, but they improved it in my mind. They had philanthropy come in. They had great training of teachers. They stuck with it over a long period of time. And Florida and Mississippi, in a relatively short period of time, went from 50 out of 50 on the 4th grade reading test, the NAEP test, to above the national average. So who tell me. So for those on the left and right that believe that no accountability matters, that you don't measure, it's okay, that local control without any control is the way to go, I would say no. I would say let's create real strategies to assure that every child can learn, because they can. Yep. Mississippi is now, in our federal system, thank God, Mississippi now is a model for other states to emulate, and they are doing it.
Right.
I wish it was happening at faster speed, because I'm too old to watch this for the next 20 years. I'd like to see it happen at warp speed so that a whole generation isn't lost. But New York ought to be following what's going on in Mississippi. Man. California ought to be following the states that think they're brilliant because of their progressive agendas that have no interest in changing should follow the example of states that have taken the hard work of making it happen. And my hope is that they will. I think the answer is, in this group, there are leaders that are passing really meaningful pieces of legislation as it relates to parental choice, literacy, accountability, focusing on career orientation. They become then those, if we faithfully execute those ideas that are implemented, signed by a governor, implemented faithfully, they become the examples for the rest of the country. And while it's a long haul, that's the work that's going on all across the country, and that's why I'm so happy people come here, because they see that their work is being validated.
And what's possible. So the phrase, thank heavens for Mississippi, now has a different meaning, something we can aspire to. And I
hope they're bragging big in Mississippi, because they should be.
A quick plug for the panel that we're doing after on math. We're going to be talking about the California Math Framework, which also has some.
But you're marking. I don't think you're neutral on this one.
No, I'm not neutral.
Okay, I'm just checking.
The math framework. So we can't have a conversation about policy without talking about COVID, the aftermath. Many of the issues that we saw during COVID, post-COVID existed before, simply exacerbated. Does anything change in terms of what our prescription has to be to now account for the losses that we saw, not necessarily due to COVID, but due to the policies, the closures that occurred during COVID? Yeah,
it turns out that young people weren't at risk. And the people that had that view were shunted aside in the midst of COVID. I hope that policymakers have the humility to recognize that some of the positions that were taken were wrong and adjust the policies, because what we learned is kids in school do better than kids that they're not in school. What a novel, brilliant observation. Kids that have access to broadband, high-speed broadband, did better than kids that didn't, and so there should be an initiative to assure that broadband, and now we've got this huge slug of dough, $40 billion, we need to assure that every child, irrespective of their income, has access to high-speed broadband to enhance the learning that goes on in the classroom. And we should be reminded of the fact that parents matter. The interesting thing that's different today, the catalyst for the incredible surge of parental choice in this country was related to moms particularly, but moms and dads realizing that their kids were being taught crap. They were the teachers of their kids, and they said, holy shamoly, I didn't realize this was going on. And they had a greater appreciation of what was going on, and they demanded better. And they want to be empowered. So you see a massive surge in homeschooling, which I think is fantastic. You see ESAs passing in Arizona, in Utah, in Arkansas, West Virginia prior. Florida went to an ESA. I'm missing all the states. I'm going to get in trouble, but
South Carolina is
getting there. I got a little work to do.
North
Carolina. There's states that are beginning the journey and states that have gone full-fledged into this, and that's all post-pandemic for a reason.
Yeah, even in the Black community, like COVID, the Census Bureau had done, surveying only something like 3.3%
Iowa.
of black
Got Iowa, excuse me.
Oh yeah, certainly Iowa. But only 3.3% of black families were interested in pursuing homeschooling. Post-COVID, it's like 16.6%, So there's really something there. So you talked about Mississippi, the reading miracle, and in general, we're hearing a lot about the science of reading. We're making real progress there. Are we on the right track?
We are on the right track, and this is why this summit is kind of important. Last year, we were in Salt Lake City, and we had Emily Hanford come to talk about her incredible podcast and the research, the learnings that she developed through that experience. And states have begun to ban 3Qing, this insidious idea that you guess what the word means rather than learn what the word means. The science of reading, I'm not sure who came up with that term, it's kind of a weird term for it, but there is a better way of doing this, and teachers need to be trained on it. The next step for those that have banned 3Qing in the classroom needs to ban 3Qing in schools of education. And we need to expand teacher development work so that teachers know how to teach kids how to teach reading. I mean, imagine we have all these schools of education, they don't teach an elementary school teacher how to teach reading, and then they're thrown into the classroom and they're expected to work a miracle. So there's a lot more work that could be done. The states that haven't banned 3Qing ought to do it. And we need to defend this because it works.
What states have banned it?
States have banned it. I think there's Patricia, there's 10 states that I think banned 3Qing, and more on the way this legislative session. That's the easier lift. The harder lift is to get deeper into the schools of education so teachers actually have the tools to be successful doing it. And then fight back against the economic issues that are at stake here, because reading recovery, which is the counter to the science of reading, that curriculum is embedded in almost all states. The state of Ohio had banned 3Qing, and the reading recovery program is designed by an Ohio State professor, or two of them, and they're suing.
Right.
Because my gosh, you're going to take away my profit from a generation of textbooks that were flawed to the core. And so we have to fight back against those initiatives as well. This is where, I'm getting less, I've always believed that we're a bottom-up country and local control matters. Yeah. But I don't know if local control works when you are doing bad things.
Right.
And sometimes the state, which is what the majority of the folks here, that state legislators, state policymakers, they need to realize that there needs to be a balance between local control and the high expectations that we should have, because we'll get better results. And I hope that we never ignore that fact, that you guys have a responsibility to create higher expectations. Now let the local schools,
have the freedom and innovation.
Have the freedom to come up with the best ways to assure that we meet those standards and our expectations. But don't get rid of accountability based on some, notion that it's, local control matters. If local control matters, then we're never going to have charter schools like you have in the Bronx. We're not going to have the kind of innovation that takes place, because monopolies don't go quietly in the night. They're highly political. They're really well organized. They're organized for the economic interests of the adults. And if you give all of that power to groups that are designed around the economic interests of the adults, you're not going to get the kind of reforms that we need.
Yep. Just to put some numbers behind what you're saying, the National Council for Teacher Quality released a report looking at 700 education preparation programs and how they were aligned to the science of reading. 2 out of 3 programs fail to teach future teachers how to teach students to sound out words, and 40% are still teaching instructional practice that runs counter to what the evidence says. So what are the kinds of incentives that the folks in this room can provide for schools of education within their states to change those outcomes?
Well, they can follow the lead of the schools that are grading, on that incredible report that took place. Yep. There are very few schools that excelled. Marion College is a good example of it. Steal what they do, and encourage people they were graded A+. So take what's being done that works and spread it across the country. Look, inertia takes place in this stuff. Yep. This stuff doesn't happen at warp speed. Universities particularly are incredibly slow to adapt change, but they will. And if you have a governor and a leadership in the legislature that says they must, where you have the power of the purse, I think it could happen a little bit faster.
Yep. All right, so that's the prescription on reading.
And by the way, that's not against, you're not invading academic freedom.
No.
To require universities to do what's right to perhaps the most important profession that we have, which is our teachers. You're not invading academic freedom to say this is the best way to do it. And the other thing I'd say is states ought to move to alternative certification of teachers as well, and do it quickly. Because we have teacher shortages across the country as teachers age out. And the next generation of teachers don't necessarily have to go to the schools of education either.
So there's not yet, at least certain in the same fervor as we have in reading, the equivalent sort of a science of math. How do we, although I know there is a movement at using that terminology, but what's next on math? And again, there's a panel, come listen in the next session. We'll be diving in, but.
So the foundation is starting to work on this. One of our incredible colleagues, Christy Hovanes, is leading the charge. And we're expanding our focus on this to help states really reimagine how we implement a math policy. It starts with Algebra 1 in 8th grade for all kids. Not to suggest, as some states have, and I'll let you go off on this if you like.
Well, no,
not to suggest that that's in terms of equity, it's unfair to require Algebra 1 or even to offer it in middle school, that you have to wait because not every kid can take Algebra 1. I mean, that's a ridiculous notion, but that's the policy in the largest state in the country.
No,
right?
This is a real thing, the California math framework. I mean, the typical progression of a solid math education is, there's pre-algebra in 7th grade, algebra 1 in 8th grade, and you up through calculus. But because not everyone's on that progression, there's this idea, well, if some kids are accelerated, that's a bad thing, so therefore let's ensure that no kid is accelerated. And it's that kind of thinking that hurts the most vulnerable students.
Yeah, and Algebra 1 is probably, if you had to pick the one thing that would be a leading indicator of college readiness, passing Algebra 1 in 8th grade would be that thing. And so if that's the case, and we want college and career readiness as the aspiration, not passing a high school graduation test that maybe means that you're, 9th grade level reader and math
If
taker.
you even have to now pass
exactly.
Pass
So
a high school graduation.
This would be a better indicator of college readiness, and it puts you on the path, the progression towards something that leads to a really meaningful life. And so why wouldn't we make that the highest priority? And that's kind of our efforts. And again, I think there needs to be more math teachers being able to teach Algebra 1, and then the progressive work after that. We have a shortage of math teachers.
Yep.
A lot of teachers are teaching out of field because that's what we have. So how do we create a whole new cadre of math teachers that could really inspire students to realize how important it is in our lives?
Yep. So we've talked a lot about math and reading, but what about history?
Ooh.
In New York State.
I love history.
Yeah. In 2010, New York State decided to eliminate the requirement to taking the social studies exam in 5th grade and 8th grade in 2010. And what's really interesting about that, if you look at sort of time studies in elementary schools, how time was spent, typically you had social studies, 45 to 50 minutes per day. And if you look at now, most elementary schools, social studies maybe occurs maybe 2 times per week or once a week. And so why are we surprised that we see such poor outcomes in history? Again, helping these folks in the room, how do we ensure decisions like that, which seem so innocuous, over time don't erode one of the most fundamental elements of an understanding of our country?
Yeah, I mean, we're becoming the disunited states of America. We are divided in all sorts of ways, and the people that aren't on our team we consider the enemy rather than maybe wrong,
But we're still Americans.
We're still, there's nothing, in a country as diverse and wacky as the United States, a bottom-up country where people pursue their dreams in all sorts of wondrous ways. That's what makes us so unique. There has to be some national identifiers. There has to be some things that we share in common. And without an understanding of our history, warts and all, we're not going to have that. So the idea of abolishing history, ignoring history, ignoring the founders' aspirations for our country, not having any sense of, the polling numbers that, they do these questions, how many branches of government we have. God.
Is that a tree?
It's heartbreaking.
It's a joke.
So reinvigorating social studies and history is not even that much taught. It's part of social studies, and it's, with all due respect, Pocahontas gets as much attention as George Washington does in some cases, at least in the social studies books. I used to mentor 8th graders in Robb Middle School. Hopefully we've created a better social studies program in the state, but there's a lot that could be done to create a cohesion in our country, at least to the point where, if I disagree with you on something, we'll have a debate about it.
Right.
And that's the American way. But right now, if I disagree with you on something, you're the enemy, and you think I'm horrible. How are we going to find common ground on the big issues we face if we don't have that sense of shared identity? And that's what social studies and history should be about, rather than some of the stuff that goes on in textbooks now in our country.
So, but look at the hostility we've just talked about to standardized tests and math and reading. So this was an example of removal of an assessment that then led to the erosion of social studies time during the school day. So what's
replaced it in these places?
Well, typically, because of some national tests, more ELA, more content-free or content-agnostic teaching, where we're only concerned with what's the main idea. It didn't matter if you were actually building vocabulary or building content knowledge. And so that's what replaced the time. So again, how do we put the genie back in the bottle when we've come to this?
Well, I'd say at the early age, teaching children how to read is like the first priority, and then really encourage them to read.
Which is not absent of content, right?
Not at all, but once you learn how to read, we should broaden the lens out to make sure that they read the extraordinary amount of literature that exists that would inspire them, give them a sense of history, make them better citizens. All that stuff is possible. You're not taking something away if you have that. Look, I love history. I learned so much from reading books. I learned a lot more than me pontificating about stuff. And my hope and prayer is that becomes the norm again in our country.
Yep. No, at our school, we're very much focused on what is the core body of knowledge that we want our students to absorb. Because if we want kids to be critical thinkers, we need to have them have knowledge to be critically thinking about.
Ian, that's why I think the classical school movement is booming in our country, because there is a yearning for this, not just about American history, but generally, civilization in general. How did we get to where we are today?
Yep. Well, let's turn to one of your areas of passion, school choice. And it feels like the tale of two cities. We're both at the best of times and the worst of times. As you said, post-COVID, many parents, many states are passing ESAs, vouchers, more school choice. It's wonderful. And yet in other states, and I just read in Illinois, they have a scholarship program. Like in Decatur, Illinois, I'm estimating numbers, about 8,900 total kids in Decatur, Illinois. About 8,300 of them cannot read at grade level. And yet there's a scholarship program that's been relatively successful, but now the state's going to just let it expire at the end of the year. In New York, there's a cap on charter school. I opened a Vertex Partnership Academies is in District 12 in the Bronx. Only 7% of kids graduate from high school ready for college. And we opened a charter school. We were sued by the teachers union. Thankfully, we won. But it's to give you a sense of this idea of choice is very, it varies. So how do we make this, again, more of a universal access for most kids?
If I had a magic wand, I would just use it and say this should be a national imperative where parents have many choices. That's not going to happen. I don't have a magic wand. So what do? We fight.
Can the Department of Education at the United States actually wield that?
No, they can't.
Okay, why?
Because it's, unless they do it unconstitutionally, which seems to be the prerogative of most departments of the federal government these days, is doing things that they don't have the authority to do. That would require changing law, and law's not going to be changed based on the current makeup of Congress. But it doesn't have to be, because there are incredible examples now across the country of states either starting on the parental choice journey or constantly moving the ball forward. And those states will continue to push forward, and they become a model for other states. Our big problem in Florida right now is we have a shortage of private school capacity. Think about that. How do we build capacity to meet the demands of parents that have now been given call it an $8,800 or $9,000 education savings account that they can use either in a customized way for tutoring, for special needs, maybe going to the traditional high school for band, where they would have to pay for a part of that, or special, students with special needs getting special accelerated help in their home. We're moving towards a completely customized learning experience that is unique to each child. That's the hope and dream. That's been my hope and dream for the last 40 years, literally. And some states are on the verge of doing that. And as they do it, they become a model for the states that are beginning the journey to stay the course, who become the model for, our beloved friends in New York and New Jersey and Connecticut and Massachusetts to a certain degree, California, Oregon, Washington, that are controlled by the teachers union, to be honest about it. And at some point that dam will break when you see the success of parents being able to customize how their child is being taught.
So just for the benefit of the entire audience, go under the hood a little bit. Describe in more detail, how does the Florida ESA program work so that you've created such unbelievable choice?
Well, first I would say, I get a lot of credit for being the governor when we started the first statewide voucher program, and it was expanded under my watch. But kudos to the leaders, the successive governors after me. Well, maybe not all. There was one that was a gap, but then he went along with it, to be fair about it. But Governors Scott and DeSantis have expanded it, and as important, the Florida legislature always was moving the ball forward. So it was never one broad stroke. Maybe there was half a step back, 5 steps forward. And that kind of environment, I think, is essential for this. And there are states that have done that. And so now we have full-blown education savings accounts, and it's not just Florida. There's caps in spending in states. We allow private school students already in private schools to be able to receive an education savings account as well. So ultimately, and it's focused on there's ESC kids with learning disabilities and lower income kids are in the front of the line.
So but talk about that, because that's a very important detail. What are some of those thresholds,
well,
approximately?
Kids in poverty have first dibs on the programs. And what we now do, I think the next step for Florida and states that have really started this really ambitious idea is to turn parents into informed consumers. If you guys go online and go to the departments of education, and we're having a meeting with this great superintendents that are here. They'll probably tell me I'm wrong about this, but I'm pretty certain I'm right. It's not the most consumer-friendly. It's normally an Excel spreadsheet about the schools available. We now have AI that can make it totally customized for a kid, a parent that lives in a particular place, to give you all the array of options that exist to turn parents into informed consumers. That's the next step, because once you do that, once parents realize that they have this right to be able to customize the learning experience, they could go to a private school, they could homeschool, they could go to a hybrid school, they could do part online, all that together, once they realize they have it, it's never going to be taken away. It's never going to be taken away. Parents are the best protector of these programs because they're not going to give it up. And low-income parents particularly aren't going to give it up. And so we've had a huge surge. Florida has close to half of the kids in the nation going to private schools in some form with government money. And that's not going to be the case forever, because other states are going to be ramping up very quickly. And kudos to, again, Arizona, Iowa, Utah, West Virginia, Arkansas. Other states are in line to do this. My hope is that you'll see Louisiana, Tennessee, Oklahoma, a bunch of other states that are South Carolina, that are embracing this idea. And 5 years from now, the whole education landscape is going to be dramatically different, empowered by parents. And man, that is like a dream come true for a lot of us in this room.
That's amazing. Whenever...
And just one other point for those that are here and they're, oh my God, what's going to happen to my public schools? They're going to get better. They're going to get better. For some people that seems counterintuitive, but the data suggests this, that all schools get better when parents have been given the power of making the most important decision that they'll have as a parent.
Whenever I have to go to Albany and meet with a prickly legislator, the silver bullet is to come with a parent. And I want you to tell that parent that they shouldn't have the right to send their kids.
By the way, we're in Georgia right now, and you mispronounced. It's called Albany. It's South Georgia. They're more open to school choice than Albany.
There you go, than Albany, right. So let's now talk about yet another challenge that teachers and families and parents are dealing with, and that is the incredible impact of digital devices and social media. Jonathan Haidt's going to be speaking, I think, later. And
as they say in North Florida, he's going to let the big dog eat.
There you go.
You can use that, Jonathan. I'm sure that works for NYU,
Oh, there he is. Hey, Jonathan. So at our school, we allowed cell phones to be used during the school. We banned them. Well, we allowed them to be brought into the school. Right. We allowed them to come into the school, trusting that our students would just kind of keep them in their back. Yeah, not so good. Not so good. So this year, we now have a ban. So every morning, every student we have what's called a Yonder pouch. Every kid has to submit their cell phone, their smartwatch, their AirPod. Any digital device goes into that pouch, and it's locked during the entire day by the school, and then it's not unlocked until they're ready to go home. And it has been transformative in our environment. It's just a calmer learning environment. I know this sounds crazy. Kids are spending less time even in the bathroom. So what do you think about that? What should legislators do? In New York, and actually a lot of attorney generals have just sued companies like Meta because they're saying these social media apps are designed to be addictive and collecting all sorts of information on minors. How do we get ahead of this, or is it it's already out of the bag?
Ian, the first step is what you did, and if you go to the elite private schools across the country, they've been doing this. If you go to the places where the social media technology is being built, those technologists don't allow their kids they don't access social media, I promise you, until they're old enough to be able to use it in the proper way. So the first step is to ban the use of social media during school hours, but kudos to Texas and Arkansas, but particularly Utah, for banning the use of social media or requiring parental approval for the use of social media till a child turns 18.
Right.
Not just during school, but period. And Jonathan will talk about this, and I won't steal his thunder, but I think that's the next step. The next step is to say, this is dangerous. This creates weak, less resilient students. It creates, particularly for young girls, it's so easy to be bullied on social media. And boys, the research that Jonathan is going to share with us suggests antisocial behavior. And so I'm a huge believer in technology, and I hope we get a chance to talk about AI, because it's like so exciting to imagine having AI be used as a tool for teachers and a tool for remediation and customization and for students. But social media should not be front and center in the lives of young people. Let them learn how to interact with one another. Let them learn how to resolve disputes. Let them run around, free play. Let them do the things that most people in this room did when they were growing up. And it turned out okay. I mean, we're all screwed up, I guess, in some ways, but at least at least we can resolve our disputes in some ways. The next generation is going to have our time. And those kids, by the way, are the ones on college campus marching for social equity, marching for Hamas without even knowing what it means because of social media's impact. It's debilitating and dangerous. And so that's a place where legislators can play a really constructive role.
Amazingly, we're almost out of time, but I do want to ask you one quick question and then final. At our school, we now have a pathway where students at the end of sophomore year can choose a careers pathway where they can do apprenticeships, internships as juniors and seniors in high school. How important is it, do you think, the secondary experience now opens up working in industry out of high school as opposed to this dominant ideology that still remains of college for all?
It is hugely important. Getting a four-year degree in psychology means you're basically going to not be a psychologist for sure. Unless I'm wrong, Jonathan, I don't know, you did all right, but you're going to go get a master's or PhD maybe, but it's not necessarily the path forward in terms of a career, and the cost of that is extraordinarily high. The return on investment for a pathway that allows you to be a nurse quicker, or a teacher quicker, or an information technologist with a certificate that says that you can begin the journey to get a wage that is higher than the median of your community. All of that work now is a place where states are really working hard, and I'm excited about that. So college readiness, we certainly should be continuing to advance, but career readiness should be as important. And by the way, career readiness has higher standards and expectations than college readiness. We've lowered down our standards to get into college because kids are not really college ready. Remediation work in community colleges particularly is extraordinarily high. And so focusing on career readiness is the way forward, I think. Indiana, for those that are interested in following a model that really works, is the place to go. To see innovative approaches where there's there's the career scholarship accounts where what Indiana's going to do is bonus the schools that actually provide a career-ready course work so that when they graduate and they begin that journey, they actually get bonused after the fact for a job well done. That kind of work, I think, is what's going to create a surge of this type of activity. In the world, I mean, we have shortages of labor all across the whole spectrum of our economy. And so this is the path forward for high schools in our country.
All right. Well, in your closing comment, transport yourself back to 2007 when you had launched ExcelinEd. You just finished 8 years of governor. Is there anything that you would do differently then or that you think we need to do now to get the kinds of outcomes that we're all seeking for kids?
So on January 3rd of 2007, when they kicked me out and I walked out the door and caught an American Airlines plane back to my beloved Miami from Tallahassee, the first thing I would have wanted to do was go find Elon Musk and be an investor in his business. I don't know. That would have been an interesting ride to follow.
In any of his multiple businesses, right?
But that doesn't relate to education. I think accelerating the parental choice movement as quickly as we could, although sometimes the moment is right, and we certainly in the post-pandemic era see this now with more clarity. Embracing creating tools for teachers. Now we have these incredible tools that are emerging to be able to take struggling students, to give them options that fit their needs. I mean, if you love sports, why not be able to use ChatGPT or the Khan Academy artificial intelligence work that's now being, a lot of states are starting to embrace it, to make it interesting and relevant so that you can deal with these issues of fractions or math math projects or across the board. It's not just math. You can empower teachers to take away all the administrative burden to have this tool, and students can use it as well. That's what we're merging towards. If I knew how fast that would be developed, I'd be a proponent of it. I didn't have the vision to look over the horizon to see that. And then I would have continued to try to, if I was leaving my job, I would try to figure out how to create a political environment in our country where people that disagree with you are not the enemy. we need to put aside education here for a moment, although it's really important. Our democracy requires us to find common ground when it exists, rather than, be worried that someone's going to pummel you because you actually found common ground with someone that didn't agree with you on 90 other things. We need to get to that quick in our country because a lot of things are broken, and we need to fix them to create the 21st century being an American one.
Wow. Well, with that, please join me in thanking and applauding.
Thank you, Ian.
Governor Bush. Thanks.